And Mr. De Valera declared that there was a constitutional way of solving our differences. He expressed his readiness to accept the decision of the people. He resigned office, and a provisional government was formed to act with Dáil Éireann. Two duties faced that government: to take over the executive from the English and to maintain public order during the transition from foreign to native government, and the second, to give shape in a constitution to the freedoms secured. If the government had been allowed to carry out these duties, no difficulty would have arisen with England, who carried out her part by evacuating her army and her administration. No trouble would have arisen among our own people, and the general trend of development and the undoubted advantages of unity would have brought the North East quietly into the Union with the rest of the country, as soon as a stable national government had been established into which they could have come with confidence. Mr. De Valera and those who supported him in the Dáil were asked to take part in the interim government without prejudice to their principles and their right to oppose the ratification of the treaty at the elections. They were asked to help in keeping an orderly, united nation with the greatest possible strength over against England, exercising the greatest possible peaceful pressure towards the union of all Ireland, and with the greatest amount of credit for us in the eyes of the world, and with the greatest advantage to the nation itself in having a strong, united government to start the departments of state and to deal with the urgent problems of housing, land hunger, and unemployment. They did not find it possible to accept this offer of patriotic service. Another offer was then made. If they would not join in the work of transition, would they not cooperate in preserving order to allow that transition peacefully to take place? Would they not cooperate in keeping the army united, free from political bias, so as to preserve its strength for the proper purpose of defending the country in the exercise of its rights? This also was refused. It must be remembered that the country was emerging from a revolutionary struggle, and, as was to be expected, some of our people were in a state of excitement, and it was obviously the duty of all leaders to direct the thoughts of the people away from violence and into the steady channels of peace and obedience to authority. No one could have been blind to the course things were bound to take if this duty were neglected. It was neglected, and events took their course. Our ideal of nationality was distorted in hair-splitting over the meaning of sovereignty and other foreign words under advice from minds dominated by English ideas of nationality. And led away, some soon got out of control and betook themselves to the very methods we had learned to detest in the English and had united to drive out of the country. By the time the Ard Fheis met, the drift had become apparent, and the feeling in favour of keeping the national forces united was so strong that a belated agreement was arrived at. In return for a postponement of the elections, the anti-treaty party pledged themselves to allow the work of the provisional government to proceed. What came of that pledge? Attempts to stampede meetings by revolver shootings, to wreck trains, the suppression of free speech, of the liberty of the press, terrorization and sabotage of a kind that we were familiar with a year ago. And with what object? With the sole object of preventing the people from expressing their will and of making the government of Ireland by the representatives of the people as impossible as the English government was made impossible by the united forces a year ago. The policy of the anti-treaty party had now become clear: to prevent the people's will from being carried out because it differed from their own, to create trouble in order to break up the only possible national government, and to destroy the treaty with utter recklessness as to its consequences. A section of the army, in an attempt at a military despotism, seized public buildings, took possession of the chief courts of law of the nation, dislocating private and national business, reinforced the Belfast boycott, which had been discontinued by the People's Government, and commandeered public and private funds and the property of the people. Met by this reckless and wrecking opposition, and yet unwilling to use force against our own countrymen, we made attempt after attempt at conciliation. We appealed to the soldiers to avoid strife, to let the old feelings of brotherhood and solidarity continue. We met and made advances over and over again to the politicians, standing out alone on one fundamental point on which we owed an unquestioned duty to the people, that we must maintain for them the position of freedom they had secured. We could get no guarantee that we would be allowed to carry out that duty. The country was face to face with disaster and economic ruin, and the imminent danger of the loss of the position we had won by the national effort. If order could not be maintained, if no national government was to be allowed to function, a vacuum would be created, into which the English would be necessarily drawn back. To allow that to happen would have been the greatest betrayal of the Irish people, whose one wish was to take and to secure and to make use of the freedom which had been won. Seeing the trend of events, soldiers from both sides met to try and reach an understanding on the basis that the people were admittedly in favour of the treaty, that the only legitimate government could be one based on the people's will, and that the practicable course was to keep the peace and to make use of the position we had secured. These honourable efforts were defeated by the politicians. But at the 11th hour, an agreement was reached between Mr. de Valera and myself, for which I have been severely criticised. It was said that I gave away too much, that I went too far to meet them, that I had exceeded my powers in making a pact which to some extent interfered with the people's right to make a free and full choice at the elections. It was a last effort on our part to avoid strife, to prevent the use of force by Irishmen against Irishmen. We refrained from opposing the anti-treaty party at the elections. We stood aside from political conflict so that, so far as we were concerned, our opponents might retain the full number of seats which they had held in the previous Dáil. And I undertook, with the approval of the government, that they should hold 4 out of the 9 offices in the new ministry. They calculated that in this way they would have the same position in the new Dáil as in the old. But their calculations were upset by the people themselves, and they then dropped all pretence of representing the people and turned definitely against them. The irregular forces in the 4 courts continued in their mutinous attitude. They openly defied the newly expressed will of the people. On the pretext of enforcing a boycott of Belfast goods, they raided and looted a Dublin garage, and when the leader of the raid was arrested by the national forces, they retaliated by the seizure of one of the principal officers of the National Army. Such a challenge left 2 courses open to the national government: either to betray its trust and surrender to the mutineers, or to fulfil its duty and carry out the work entrusted to it by the people. The government did its duty. Having given them one last opportunity to accept the situation, to obey the people's will, when the offer was rejected, the government took the necessary measures to protect the rights and property of the people, and to disperse the armed bands which had outlawed themselves and were preying upon the nation. Unbelievers had said that there was not, and had never been, an Irish nation capable of harmonious, orderly development. That it was not the foreign invader, but the character of the Irish themselves, which throughout history had made of our country a scene of strife. We knew this to be a libel. Our historians had shown our nationality as existing from legendary ages and through centuries of foreign oppression. What made Ireland a nation was a common way of life, which no military force, no political change could destroy. Our strength lay in a common ideal of how a people should live, bound together by mutual ties and by a devotion to Ireland which shrank from no individual sacrifice. This consciousness of unity carried us to the success in our last great struggle. In that spirit we fought and won. The old fighting spirit was as strong as ever, but it had gained a fresh strength in discipline in our generation. Every county sent its boys, whose unrecorded deeds were done in the spirit of Hugh Holland at the ford. But the fight was not for one section of the nation against another, but for Ireland against the foreign oppressor. We fought for that for which alone fighting is really justified, for national freedom, for the right of the whole people to live as a nation. And we fought in a way we had never fought before, and Ireland won a victory she had never won before. The foreign power was withdrawn.